Hello everyone, I'm Transformers Fanco328 here, and it's not about you do differently, it's about what you do well. Well, this is it. My review of Fire Emblem Fates. And oh boy, do I have a lot to say about this one. For the record, most of my criticisms have little to do with the localization. After all, I understand that the localization has been extremely controversial, and in some cases it is pretty weak, but I'm looking towards the problems of the game that I personally experienced. Some from my personal experience, some that are genuinely there. But these are problems that you will not be able to avoid. Problems that knowing Japanese or getting fan patches will not save you from. This is a game that I have a lot of strong opinions on, and obviously I'm going to detail those strong opinions in this video. Though since some of the things I have to say have to do with the game as a whole, I am going to be talking about spoilers. Lots and lots of spoilers. So if you haven't played the game for yourself and do not intend to spoil yourself, then please turn away from this video. For those who happen to fall into that circumstance, I'll say that I personally found the game good, great even, for people who want a great strategy title. But me personally, there were just a few things that I personally couldn't quite get into, and there were some actual problems that really did distract me as a whole. Let's just get into the review. I wanted to love this game because the concept for the game's story was such a brilliant one. The player character, who I'll refer to as Kamui for brevity's sake and because Korin doesn't sound right to me, is born to the peace-loving kingdom of Hoshido, but was kidnapped by the glory-seeking King Garen of Nor at a young age. Despite the circumstances, Kamui is loved and cared for by the four royal siblings of the Nor Kingdom, Elise, Leo, Camilla, and Xander. But on a recon mission gone wrong, Kamui is returned to Hoshido and learns the truth, reuniting with the family they never knew they had. Despite having been gone for so long, the royal siblings of Hoshido, Sakura, Takumi, Hinoka, and Ryoma, still love Kamui very much and have been dreaming of the day they would see them again. Well, Takumi's more than a little skeptical, as he honestly has every right to be. When conflict between the two kingdoms is sparked, Kamui is divided between the blood family that deeply missed them and the adoptive family that have cared for them as if they were their own. Who they side with is up to you, the player. While not the most original idea in the world, the idea was such an engaging premise that could only be fully realized in a video game format, especially how often complex choices in video games are praised when done well. For the most part, the individual storylines were done well enough to keep me engaged until the very end, and the characters at the central focus of these stories were handled fairly well, aside from most of the siblings being a little too accepting of Kamui's word, which is why I like Takumi the most out of the bunch. However, beyond the fact that you have to pick your chosen path before your purchase unless you download the game first, which given how the first 6 chapters are set up is all the more questionable, the two storylines that result from this choice suffer in some regard. The overall storyline of Birthright is easily the most basic out of all the options. The Hoshidan army must defeat Nor's corrupt King Garen. The end. There's only the vaguest foreshadowing to the third storyline in this path, to the point where it's very easy to miss, which is quite jarring compared to Conquest, but I'll get into that in a minute. It also gets a little too kill-happy in the second half. It all started in Chapter 15, when Kazi died shortly after admitting his guilt over what happened the day of Kamui's kidnapping. Sure, if you have at least an A support level with him, this can be avoided, but when other ninjas like Saizo and Kagero come along sometime before this point, Kazi can very easily be benched until this point. But there are still 5 other character deaths that happen a little too close to each other that can't be avoided. Flora burns herself alive right in front of Kamui, Lilith takes an axe hit from Hans for Kamui, Elise takes a sword slash from Xander for Kamui, Kamui strikes down Xander in the same chapter, and Azura, revealed earlier to suffer every time she sings Lost in Thoughts all alone for more mystical purposes, does so to weaken King Garen for his final defeat, which wipes her from existence in the aftermath. Are they effective? For the most part, yes, but when you do something repeatedly, like killing multiple named characters in a short time frame, it loses its impact. Can't a story be emotionally impactful without a character dying for dramatic effect? It's not impossible. Conquest's plot suffers from Kamui constantly whining about how they regret their choice of siding with Nor multiple times, and it gets really grating, especially the not-so-subtle, "I could have avoided this if I hadn't sided with Nor" point that keeps being brought up, as well as an ass-pull in how the story unfolds. In Chapter 15, Kamui follows Azura to a place that is never elaborated upon unless you played the third storyline, finds Gunter, who was supposedly killed off at the end of Chapter 3 by Hans, and they all leave, only for Azura to pull out a crystal ball that only those who have royal dragon blood can use to see the truth truth about something, Kamui uses it to find out that King Garen is really Pius Augustus from Eternal Darkness Sanity's Requiem. Am I the only one who thought that the first time I saw this? Anyways, the crystal ball shatters because it's a one-use item, and this results in Kamui and Azura deciding that, in order to reveal the truth about King Ganondorf here, they must let him sit on Hoshido's throne, which was explained in Chapter 5 to reveal the true nature of any individual that sits their ass on that seat. However, this means that Garen must completely conquer Hoshido, and Kamui must play a part in it to maintain the illusion that they remain loyal to him, to avoid suspicion. In other words, conquest becomes the evil path that the developers promised wouldn't happen. The whole saving the kingdom from within stuff only happens when Garen's already won and the truth is irreversibly revealed, at the absolute end of the story. Why don't they ever bring up that place Azura got the crystal ball from? There's a curse that takes the life of anyone who talks about that place outside of that place. In other words, the "we wouldn't have a plot otherwise" curse. It's in play in the third storyline, but they never explain why the curse existed in the first place, or how to reverse it, as they seem to just reverse it off screen by the end of Revelation. Speaking of which, Revelation is the third storyline where Kamui refuses to side with either kingdom and tries to find a solution to the conflict outside of participating in the war, resulting in the explanations behind that out-of-nowhere place in Conquest, the Invisible King Vala, and the discovery of the real puppet master behind the Hoshido-Nor conflict. Turns out that it's a giant evil death dragon that is worshipped as a god, hates humanity, plants its unquestionably loyal servant as the puppet king of a nation that is warring with another kingdom, and not only is he directly related to the player character, but at one point even intends to use the player character as a vessel. Gee, does that sound familiar? Now, I understand that evil dragons are more of a Fire Emblem series tradition, like a Mega Man game having 8 main bosses for you to choose from, and Antagonists' backstory of being an ancient dragon that was worshipped as a god but was forgotten as humanity gained power through other means gives him an actual motivation for his actions. A significant step up from Grima, I'll admit, but this comes with a few issues. For one thing, across all 3 campaigns, you realize that the King Garen that's physically present is basically a mindless corpse, a slave to Antagonists. And the real King Garen has been dead since at least before the game's first major plot point occurs. And since this puppet never really displays any character beyond being a war-hungry douche, our central antagonist for the retail versions of the game is a basic one-dimensional bad guy that even Saturday morning cartoons have outgrown. In the 90s. The same applies to Iago and Hans, Garen's lackeys that also serve as main villains of a sort. Revelation doesn't expand on them, and they don't get much character in the other 2 stories beyond "I'm an asshole." So in effect, the ultimate villain gets better writing, but what I consider one of Awakening's strong suits, the lesser villains, are given little motivation or character to work off of, and are a waste of effort because of it. And again, part of why Awakening's arc villains were so effective for me was their expanded roles through their Spot Pass and DLC implementations, so maybe they could get the same chance, but honestly I doubt it, especially since they'll have to pull a lot out of their asses to justify it. They had to pull a lot out of their asses to justify it in Awakening as well. Beyond a weak assortment of villains for 85% of the game's plots, the biggest problem this story concept presents is the feeling that this is the real path, considering that Anankos, the real villain behind everything, is around for more than just a brief as hell reference here and there, mostly by Garen praying to him. This basically throws the choice aspect that the game was promoted with and basically named after right out the window in favor of creating a perfect happily ever after ending where only 2 ultimately inconsequential characters out of maybe 60, and characters who were already dead, die. As if the concept wasn't ruined already by forcing you to make the choice by which version you buy. And you need one or the other to play Revelation unless you were lucky enough to get the special edition, which has all 3 paths in one cartridge. I know this had nothing to do with space limitations. I understand that they're all complete experiences in their own right, but if you can fit it all into one cartridge, why make the split? Especially when you consider that there are plenty of games out there that provide multiple complete experiences without being a compilation re-release. Hell, one compilation re-release features one of the games I'm talking about! Then there's the detail that Kamui isn't blood-related to the Hoshiden siblings at all, completely throwing the idea of choosing between a blood family and adoptive family straight in the garbage almost solely to justify Kamui's ability to marry them. Guys, if I felt wrong in marrying the adoptive siblings, how would cutting the blood ties with the blood siblings make it any better? And just to add salt to the exceedingly painful wound, it's very quickly revealed that Azura and Kamui are cousins, since their mothers are sisters. And the 2 of them can marry. Then again, it's never foreshadowed or referenced again for that matter, so... most worthless plot twist ever? I seem to have the biggest issues with game storylines that render many aspects of them pointless in some way. I made a video where I discussed Kingdom Hearts Dream Drop Distance's biggest plot twist, but that game also rendered the sacrifices the heroes of Birth by Sleep went through meaningless as everything happened as Xehanort intended. I ranted about BlazBlue Chrono Phantasma's introduction as Hades Izanami, whose villain's two powers had what would have been a satisfactory conclusion to the series go down the toilet, in favor of an extension of the plotline by invoking a generic doomsday plot about killing everyone because, though her presence in Central Fiction does show promise. I reviewed Bioshock Infinite's Burial at Sea DLC, which by the end of it rendered just about everything Bioshock related worthless as the first game, and now Fire Emblem Fates Revelation says screw you to anyone who wanted a compelling adventure about what true family means for the sake of putting Awakening story on repeat. Also concerned that this basically creates a villain for a conflict that should have had no villainous side. A clash of ideals that pins the blame on both sides, instead of some vengeful puppet master forcing a conflict that wouldn't have happened were it not for him. It's just not as well done as I wanted it to be. The more I look at this plot, the more it falls apart. But that's not all I take issue with in Fates. When I played Birthright, I found that the supports I was getting really weren't hooking me. They weren't as compelling, revealing, or entertaining as the ones from Awakening, so I stopped caring about getting supports, especially considering they significantly nerfed the pair-up feature, though that's for balance reasons it isn't what I consider a flaw with the game, more my personal problem. Also, due to the circumstances of most of the units, seeing as how they're either royal siblings or the retainers of said siblings, I wasn't seeing any romantic chemistry between them. There wasn't a pair of characters where I could just look at them and say, yes, they're perfect for each other. Then again, I'm not exactly a shipper, so what do I know? Sure, the relationships in Awakening would also go right from friendship to marriage, but I wasn't feeling the need to keep certain units together beyond an A support level in Fates. Considering that the support conversations were one of the best features in Fire Emblem, not just Awakening, for allowing unlikely character meetups to occur, and expanding on what would have been underdeveloped background characters, disengaging me from the idea of pursuing supports beyond the ones I was getting unintentionally is a big issue. Since I didn't have the drive to learn about the characters beyond what the main storyline was telling me, I wasn't as into this game as I was Awakening. Sure, there are some good supports in the game if you look hard enough, like those with Severo, Owain, and Inigo with each other and the others they interact with, and the Conquest characters in general, especially the siblings and retainers. But that just makes Conquest's lack of opportunities to gain supports outside of paid DLC even more painful, especially when the plot-driving Chapter 15 deprives you of a chance to forge most of the available relationships. Even then, my disinterest from Birthright carried over, and I only kept to relationships that were already forged for the sake of getting through the game, though I'll get more into that in a bit. While I did like some of the characters, I'd hardly consider making a countdown about them, because I never had the interest to look that much into them. That and there's, 60 plus characters to sort through? I ain't got time for that. Especially considering this results in so many supports! Which may be why the writing wasn't as strong. I mean, even the best writers would have trouble creating hundreds of believable relationships in one single storyline. Adding to that is the fact that marriage is still in the game, as well as children units. Again, I know this has been a thing in other Fire Emblem games. Hell, Awakening outright said it in their prior Fire Emblem Spot Pass unit lists. But the way they handled children here isn't very effective. You see, the married couple immediately conceive following the S support. That's a bit unfortunate considering how many underage looking characters there are in this game, but that's beside the point. They decided that the war-torn world of Hoshido and Nohr would not be the best place to raise a child. Fair enough, I'd come to the same conclusion. Their solution? Throw their children in a pocket dimension where they grow up exponentially, have scarce visits from their parents, and are effectively in constant risk of being hurt within this isolation. As a result, several of these children units form some kind of psychological issues, usually stemming from abandonment. Guys, you wanted children! Not Nintendo's version of Kylo Ren multiplied by however many marriages with children you have! In addition, these children units are once again hidden behind paralogs, though this time the enemies scale with your units, or at least scale with your progress in the story, meaning that it'll be a challenge to not only complete each paralog, but keep the children alive throughout no matter when you try to get them. One of the worst in my opinion, and admittedly the only one I pursued, is Rajat. Be warned, people! We've reached a Kingdom Hearts level of subtlety! Why is she a problem? Well, aside from being the child of Hayato, whose stature makes marrying him with someone kind of awkward, and obviously repeating a character without just bringing them back, and a rather divisive one at that, she's the only female same-sex marriage option. This type of scenario is part of why I asked for more same-sex marriage options in my second Fates video. You leave us with literally one option for a lesbian marriage, and it's not only a child character, one that commonly looked after as a babysitter once at that, but a repeat of character that people may or may not have liked to begin with, where their worst traits flanderized in the English version. That's the reason why I pursued her, to see how the same-sex marriage played out, and it was okay. Flawed, but okay. Though, from what I've read, the localization basically copy-pasted her straight marriage conversation instead of having a unique conversation like in the Japanese version. Oops! But the biggest issue with these children, in my opinion, is that they're optional. Completely supplementary to your game. As in, you can beat all 3 stories without ever knowing they were a thing, which is what happened with my Birthright run. Since they're a complete non-factor to Fates' storylines, there's little reason to get them. Sure, most of the children units in Awakening are much the same story, you know, being optional and all that, but Lucina is a plot-important character that you can't skip, and you'll likely have forged another marriage by Chapter 14 when the paralogs open up. You are made privy to that information, and it gives you motivation to pursue other relationships and see what children come out of it. In fact, once I beat my second playthrough, I went and played Matchmaker to get the rest of the children units, and I was surprised at how well some of the pairings I made turned out, like Frederick and Cher, Muriel and Henry, and Olivia and Donald. Besides, the children units in Awakening are very easy to sympathize with given the circumstances they were raised in, especially since Grima was something out of their parents' control. That and the circumstances they end up in outside of Grima's future. Maybe they shouldn't have bothered with the children units in Fates, and thus the parents should have held off on having kids until after this war from hell is over. In short, I like some of the characters, and the individual plots of Fates are fine on their own, but taken together and carefully observed, especially when you consider the amazing concept that in some ways writes itself, they have quite the fair amount of hard-to-ignore issues, and as a result I couldn't really get fully invested in the world of Hoshido and Nor. Even Revelation having much more interesting support as a result of putting nearly every character on both sides under one roof, I always felt this disconnect that discouraged me from doing much with it. I think there's a problem when I lose interest in learning about the characters, because then it starts to become something that I wished it wouldn't be. Homework. Something that I was doing specifically for this video, and I wasn't getting enough personal enjoyment to fully justify my time with it. I'm glad I can make this video for you, and I wouldn't trade my experiences for the world, but I wasn't having a blast seeing these storylines unfold. However, there are some things that I did really like about this game. For one, the graphics are amazing! I can imagine Awakening dating a bit in a few years, but Fates is extremely detailed, from the battle scene's backdrops resembling wherever it's taking place on the overworld map, resulting in smoother transitions, to all the individual details on each character model. The effort that went into the game's visual presentation is present in every waking frame of this game, as opposed to every sleeping frame. Point is, I feel that Fates is one of the best looking games I've ever seen for the 3DS. And I doubt anything on the system can top it. The music's pretty good too. I'm not exactly interested in pursuing every single track to listen to while working on my projects, as I've already got a pretty big assortment of music for that, but it's still very good and definitely memorable when I hear it. Especially that final boss theme, End of All Roads. If you thought Id Purpose was a great track, then this will blow you away. It's lengthy, climactic, triumphant, and satisfying, as are the fights associated with it. It's easily one of my top 5 favorite final boss themes. Though if I'm going to be honest, I had a hard time motivating myself to write the gameplay section. Not because it's bad, but because I personally couldn't really get into it. If there's one thing we can agree on, it's that Awakening had one too many easily accessible game breakers. When there's an entire TV tropes page full of one game's broken stuff, some of which is rooted in the very mechanics of the game like the pair-up system, you know there's a balance problem. The honor system only works on so many people, especially when there's no other reason to not use them since there's no in-game drawbacks. So naturally, Fates would make as many efforts as it can to make the game much more balanced, which is impressive since they cut weapon durability on everything except staves. The pair-up mechanic is now a stance system. When units are separate but adjacent to each other, the adjacent unit can perform a follow-up attack. But when units are together as one unit, they can protect against enemy attacks if a defense gauge fills after a few hits, or when a paired-up enemy has their partner follow up. Yes, enemies can pair up. Some are paired up from the start, and they all have the same advantages and disadvantages as the player. There are no second seals, so class rotation is significantly more difficult since none of the other seal types, aside from Master Seals, will reset a unit's level. Although if they reclass to a more advanced class, they do gain the skills of the lower tiered class as they level up. If they can level up, that is. There is a seal that extends the level cap by 5, so that helps. Some weapons like shurikens and daggers can cause debuffs to your stats for a turn, but they can pile up after a while. There are dragon veins layered all around the map that can alter the map to your advantage or disadvantage depending on the circumstances. And some of it is meaningless since the effects are quickly rendered null and void, like the damn Mokushu maps where some of the floors are spike traps that damage any units on them every turn. And reversing them doesn't matter as they can be activated again anyway. There are also various attack towers that can be used by certain classes for good damage from a distance, but they only have so much range and can be worthless depending on where you have your units, where the enemy's units are, and hell, the fact that they won't kill units. One of the biggest differences between the three campaigns is the requirements for success. Birthright sticks to Awakening's objectives of kill everyone, defeat the boss, and in one chapter, getting the fuck out of there. And you can also revisit maps to level grind, though it seems to be a much slower process than Awakening was. Revelation has slightly more complex objectives, but you can return to previously completed maps and grind like in Birthright. Conquest has no way to grind outside of a few castle invasions in DLC, and features the most complex objectives. But with one exception, it doesn't really go beyond Seas, which requires you to kill the boss standing on the tile you need to be on to end the chapter. Though the strategy involved to get there, as well as the map design, is where the complexity of that objective comes from. I'm sure if you've played the game, you know the one exception I'm referring to. Conquest Chapter 10. For me, everything was going well on my normal casual run of the game, getting through chapters 6 through 9 with minimal trouble. And then Takumi shows up at the docks, and you have to keep his forces away from 4 green tiles for 11 turns. And these forces will gain reinforcements on just about every turn. There are Sky Knights, Hoshido's Pegasus Knights, that can bypass terrain that prevents others, including your own units, from progressing, giving them much easier access to the goal point. You do get Camilla around turn 2, who can also bypass that terrain, but the thing is, you only get one Camilla, and they have dozens of Sky Knights. Hell, once you hit turn 7, Takumi activates the dragon vein he was standing on, which drains the water away, opening the pathway for all the other enemy forces to gang up on the exit. As an added bonus, there's always the chance that a unit that would most likely hit the enemy they were engaged with can miss their attack, easily starting the downfall of your entire strategy. I don't have the patience for everything hinging on circumstances beyond my control. I could not for the life of me deal with these circumstances, so I dropped to Phoenix mode, where fallen units come back the following turn. And even then, that's not a guaranteed win condition, which I learned the hard way. I'm not complaining that it's challenging, I'm complaining that for me, it's bullshit hard, with a hint of luck-based progression. If this is what the earlier Fire Emblem games are like, then I'm staying as far away from the series as I possibly can and sticking to my action games, thank you very much. At least there, the gap between victory and defeat is more likely related to your reflexes and skills, factors that are in your hands. If I wanted to let the dice determine whether I win or lose, I'd play a board game or go to a casino. While I did go back to casual for the next 2 chapters, I lost my patience at chapter 13 and stayed on Phoenix mode for the rest of my Conquest run. I know that path was more for fans of earlier Fire Emblem games and wasn't made for people who only played Awakening and Birthright beforehand like me, but I still had to play through it to see how that storyline unfolded. Aside from having already paid for the campaign, I'd rather know most of what I'm talking about rather than leave a significant detail like that pass me by. For the record, I never dropped to Phoenix and Birthright, but I did in Revelation Chapter 22. By that point, I just wanted to end this, and that's not a good thing. The game had a few too many mechanic revamps for me to keep up with, and since it was all nerfed from Awakening, I felt underpowered in all 3 of my runs, even with the grinding opportunities of Birthright and Revelation. Combine that with the disconnect I felt from the characters and support conversations, and I wasn't fully engaged in the gameplay. So when it began frustrating me, I just threw on the crutches so I could have a concrete opinion on the story before going back to the games I was used to. Maybe Awakening's many game breakers were a big part of why that game was so accessible, but in all honesty, my experience with Fates says more about me and my gaming taste than it does the actual quality of the game. All the aspects of this game combine to make a great strategy title that truly relies on life or death choices made in the middle of combat. The positioning of your units, what weapons they use, the environment, the status of your enemies, the skill set each unit has. That's all there, and I understand how this is compelling for the audience that Fire Emblem has gathered. I just didn't have the patience to come up with proper strategies to overcome those circumstances beyond throwing my strongest units at the enemies and benching my weaker ones. What does it say about me when I struggled to beat this game on the lowest difficulty settings, but I had little problems completing a game like Kingdom Hearts Birth by Sleep on the equivalent to hard mode, including all the optional bosses with both Aqua and Terra, generally seen as the best and worst characters for said bosses? Considering that I've been playing Kingdom Hearts since I was at least 7, given the first game in the series was the first game I got for the PlayStation 2 alongside the system itself, and I've kept up with the series since, and the only Fire Emblem game I played before Fates was Awakening, that I think says I have more attraction to reflex-driven action dependent mostly on player input than I do brain-taxing strategies that hinge on unseen slot machines. Considering every other game I reviewed on this channel has been short action games involving directly controlling someone either shooting, slashing, or smashing things with minimal elements of luck, and when luck is involved I usually speak of it in a derogatory light, that sounds about right. I'm willing to give something new a try, but if I don't feel comfortable playing it, or the storyline and characters aren't hooking me, I leave it alone and return to my regularly scheduled reaction-based games. Sure, I play Pokemon all the time as well, but outside of the competitive scene and capturing rare Pokemon, you're not really required to call upon actions with less than 100% accuracy to beat the Pokemon League and beat the region's evil team. Even then, competitive gameplay has established many rules that prohibit as many luck-based elements as possible, such as evasion. And capturing certain rare Pokemon, particularly legendaries, is a one-time thing, mostly occurs late to endgame, and is for the most part not required. And when it is required, they up the catch rate so you're not there all day. That 90% hit rate easily missing always carries with you throughout Fire Emblem, and I don't even care that much about the My Castle feature. I admit that it was kind of addicting to level up the place and customize it to your liking, but when most of it adds up to a multiplayer function I have no intention of using and a grand total of 3 AI castle battles, combined with Street Pass interaction that's become useless to me since I stopped bringing my 3DS everywhere, I see no point in investing time into it. I stopped caring with Conquest since you only get so many resources anyway, and I had no further investment in Revelation where I only upgraded the shops to get better gear and make my run easier. I'll say this. I put Fire Emblem Fates away the second Revelations credits finished rolling. Meanwhile, not only had I completed Kingdom Hearts 2 Final Mix and most of its optional content, particularly its boss battles, but as I was writing this, I was working towards completing a critical mode run of the game to get the gold trophy for beating it on the difficulty. It's a pain at times, but I've made it through a good chunk of it, and I had fun figuring things out and using tactics I hadn't used too often before. In other words, Fates no longer held my interest the second it ended, while other titles I've loved since I was young can maintain their staying power over a decade later. I want to make it clear that I do not think Fates is a bad game. In any way. But I couldn't quite get into it. I did enjoy certain times and certain moments in the game, but I would be lying to my grave if I were to say this was one of my all-time favorite games, or a game that I would love to revisit over and over again. There are aspects of this game that can make for an amazing experience if this is the kind of game you're looking to play. And if you happen to really love this game, that's great, more power to you. But as far as I'm concerned, I'm glad I played it through once, but I'd rather beat Birth by Sleep's mysterious figure with Terra on the initial international PSP release on critical mode 5 times over before I even consider revisiting any one of the 3 games connected under the title of Fire Emblem Fates. Some of the story issues I had seemed to stem from its over-ambition, trying to tell a much grander 3-part story when it would have been stronger in every way if it just told one story. A story where Conway refuses to choose a side, but where there's no pinkish-shaped dragon god to pin all the blame on. A story where a prince or princess divided between the family they've known their whole life and the family they're directly related to finds a way to end this destructive conflict with minimal bloodshed, rallying select Hoshidans and Norians under the same cause. But not all of them. Where the final battle is not just a clash of blades and spells, but of ideals. What they fight for, who they are, where their loyalties lie, and perhaps even seeing how similar the two kingdoms are, putting an end to this feudal conflict that would only cause turmoil for all future generations to come. Doesn't that sound much more interesting if it were fully fleshed out? At the very least, it'd be significantly less expensive than what we got. Seriously, I already paid $80 for these 3 storylines. I think I've given you more than enough money. Or if you have to have a price on these maps, at least make more of them free, including those plot-important maps. Hell, I take that map that explains more about a mountain coast and the Awakening Children's presence in this game over that mediocre Awakening pre-prologue. Okay, I'm done bitching. This was easily my biggest project yet, so please feel free to respond however you wish. Did I miss something? Am I wrong on anything? How well did I present my opinions on the game? Whether you agree or disagree, please feel free to respond how you feel, so that way I can see where I succeeded and failed, so I can improve for future projects. For now though, I'm Transformers Fanco328, and this is it for my journey through the world of Fire Emblem. Now I get to return to a world I'm much more comfortable with, Mega Man X!